Everyone, welcome to another literacy loving edition of Words, Images, and Worlds. This is also kind of a film loving edition. I'm feeling the mutual cinephile nature in the room. Delighted on this episode to be talking with author Priya Parmar. Priya, welcome. Thank you for joining.
Thank you for having me.
My pleasure. We're talking on this episode of book about a book called The Original. You're also the author of Exit the Actress and Vanessa and Her Sister. And I know that film overlaps here in a couple of ways, so I'm curious about what attracts you to film and to the subject of this particular book, The Original.
Um, Film does overlap hugely with this novel, and I don't know if I would have called myself a cinephile, you know, before this. I didn't know this is my first novel that's actually set in the US. And so I hadn't researched this period in history. So it was really thrilling to sort of dive into that world and really spend time there because it was not a place where I had, been able to make camp in terms of, my research before. Um, but I would actually, can I ask you one thing? Would you mind if I went and got my glasses? Because I can't see you, and I've just realized that I'm not going to be actually able to make eye contact because I can't see you.
No worries, of course, that's fine.
1 second. I'm just going to grab my glasses. um, because I have a thing on my computer where it keeps switching off and I can't actually see the little buttons to bring you back
No
at any
worries.
time. Okay, there we go. Can you see me now?
Yes.
Great. Um, so yeah, one thing about film is that it's really um, we're not just interested in the film, are we? We're always interested in the actor, who they are, because the if you look at the interviews and everything that surround the release of a film now, it's always about the actor and their who they are and how they inhabit the role and what they bring from their life and all of those things. And so it's film has become a place where identity kind of collides with performance. Um,
Hmm.
and Katharine Hepburn is an interesting person in that regard because she is someone we sort of think of as always playing herself. There was actually a big article in the New York Times, about Katharine Hepburn and the question, is she always playing herself? And that's because we sort of think about her as being utterly authentic and she is who she is. But in actual fact, she's hugely strategic about how she was seen. There's a Dick Cavett interview that she did that is absolutely amazing. And oh God, sorry.
No worries.
Before they,
No worries.
before they start, before the interview starts, um, it's there's 4 minutes before the interview starts, and you see her rearranging the set. You see her, I want my hair like this. I need this, put my foot up here. I need this, I need that. I hate that carpet. I hate, just all of these things that she's talking about her, how to be herself in this environment. And that's something that really interested me because, you know, I was like, okay, she's stage managing her own performance. Um, she's really being very, very intentional on, in how she's being seen, which I love that. I love that idea that this somebody who we think of as being totally authentic, we think of her as being, she's always herself. But in actual fact, I think she was very careful. She was truly herself, but she was not going to let us see more than she wanted us to see.
Yeah, yeah, the right of the performer, right? The boundaries and fences they put up, and it sounds like you learned a lot about Catherine and this time period. What was it like digging into that? What did you learn about kind of the context she was in?
Oh, goodness. I mean, I
Lots of things, right?
so much. I was going to say it's one thing about about this research is the amount that ends up on the cutting room floor is kind of
Mhm.
heartbreaking. Um, you spend all this time researching, I remember I was trying to figure out the price of a ticket to the movies. And it's actually was harder to figure out than you would think, because in one part of the country it's this, and in one theater it's this, and in one, and I spent like literally, I don't know, I think it was 2 days desperately like combing through all of these, archives and everything else, looking for, what it cost in this particular scene that is now no longer there. Because it was a scene where she and Howard Hughes went to the movies in Chicago. So finding out what a film cost in this little theater where they did go to the movies, they drove to a little town outside of Chicago. Um, it was, took me forever. And then to cut the scene, and you're like, okay, well, that had to go. So yeah, so much goes on the cutting room floor. But I think with her, I think I expected to find somebody who, she was who she was, and it was easy. And that's what I thought I was going to find. This person who just was herself, and it was straightforward, and that's what it was. And that's not what I found at all. What instead I found was in many ways much more impressive. Um, she knew what mattered to her. She knew what risks she was willing to take in order to hold on to it. And in at that point in Hollywood, that was not a small thing. That was a huge thing. The studio system really, really rewarded, conformity, playing by the rules. Starlets are supposed to look how starlets are supposed to look. I mean, they were basically referred to as livestock. A studio had a stable. They were it was not a stable of performers. So it was not an environment that was really sort of conducive to somebody really breaking out and playing by their own rules. And she really did, and that's something that I love. So her independence just felt, it didn't really feel like personality as much as it felt like serious courage.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, Curious about how you manage the elements of fact, but then also those pieces that you had to fill in as the author, because that's always the balance, right, of what actually happened and what must be imagined.
Well, there's that thing. We can never really know what happened in a life.
Mhm.
We know these chronological landmarks through a life, and that creates the kind of topographical crust, that fixed landscape, that chronology of events. And that's what we know to be true. And then everything that supports that, everything that gives that its shape, that's the fiction. So the emotional life, the reason that she made those choices that we know about that make up that, topographical crust, those all of that all of that kind of emotional decision making and emotional logic and all that negative space, that's all the fiction, and that all that and creating the tension in that, and that's where the novel lives, and that's the fun, you know.
Yeah, yeah, the imagination.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Uh, Now, I am curious. You mentioned pouring through archives. What was the research process like? What were some of the spaces that were most helpful, and what did that look like in the day to day for you?
Well, this is the first time I've ever written about someone where I could really hear their voice. Um, and
Such a
it's
distinctive voice.
such a distinctive voice and
Mhm.
so difficult to capture in words, because it it's something when you describe it, it sounds like it's going to be unpleasant, but when you listen to it, it's really compelling. And other sort of, more smoothed out, more fluid, more mellifluous, those voices sort of sound boring after you've been listening to her. Because I mean, she was just, and the authority that she carried in her voice. Um, so, so what uh, you know, I tend to do is I always start with primary documentation, all the letters I can find and all the places where they're kept, and with her, I was able to listen to, interviews that she had done. There's a wonderful interview with Clive James, that she did in the 80s. And that interview, it's not very well known. It was done for ITV in the UK, and very kindly they've given me permission to use it as the epigraph of the novel. And in it, she just says, in response to a question, um, "We none of us know each other well, do we? Not, not too well." And it's it's such an extraordinary thing for such a a famously popular person to say. She had loads of friends. She was adored. She had, these all these meaningful relationships in her life. She was so close to her family. And yet she said something like that. So I was able to, start with this wonderful, rich landscape of primary documentation, which was wonderful. I was able to be at the Billy Rose library where all of her theater stuff is held, and when you're actually able to touch the actual let I mean with gloves and someone watching you and all of those good things, but like when you're actually face to face with the actual, the things that were hers, a kind of magic happens. It's really wonderful. I just spent a day recently at the Kate Museum. Do you know what that is?
I've heard of that.
It's the Katharine Hepburn uh, Cultural Arts Center, which is
Mm-hmm.
brilliant. And it's it's got this glorious museum there, and they have her desk, they have some of her clothes, they have the bathtub, the famous bathtub when the whole house was washed away and the bathtub was left. They have all these wonderful things. And so just this incredible magic comes when you spend time with those things, and when you go to the places where she was when she lived. It's just that's magical. But then at a certain point you have to, I research all the way through, but then at some point you have to stop and you have to put it all down and you have to say, okay, I'm now hiding in the research and I'm just hanging out here because it's comfortable, and I like it and I love reading about this, and now it's time to actually, walk the plank. So
Yeah, yeah. Then you can graft it in, right? And
yeah. And,
explore.
and a wonderful novelist actually told me, because I used to be my background is in academia, and I used to be so compulsive about, I've got to document it, I've got to keep it all, I've got to know where it came from, I got to know all those things. And then and she said, you know what, don't worry about it. The important stuff is going to rise to the surface. She was like, let that happen. She was like, let
Mm,
yourself start to forget it. And that was the novelist Philippa Gregory, who's wonderful. She's
yeah.
like my godmom. And she just said, basically just like let it rise to the surface. Like don't hold on to it too tightly. And that's just such a great piece of advice. And that's what I do. So if it doesn't stick, it wasn't meant to stick.
Yeah, yeah. And
Yeah.
with that in mind, and great source there that you mentioned as well, thinking about this person's life, thinking about Katharine Hepburn, this time period, what are some of the themes, some of the ideas that for you have continued to rise to the surface that continue to resonate and maybe even shape the way you're thinking now?
I mean, so much from her life um, really has stayed with me, things that are even outside the scope of the book. Um, so, well, first, I write to a question. I always write to a question, and I don't. I've learned to stop trying to escape it, because even if I try to escape it, I have to recognize that it's not going to work, and I'm going to still end up writing to this question. Everything I've ever written, the show that I wrote co-wrote in the UK, every book, just everything is always the same question. And the question is, what is the deal you make to live the life you need to live? Um,
Mm.
I'm clearly deeply compelled by those compromises that we make to follow those inner directives that just feel um, inescapable. Um, and so I've learned that's my question, and I just have to live with it, and that's fine. Um, Katharine Hepburn's life was just, it answered that question in ways I wasn't expecting, and in ways I can't say because it'll give the plot away, but she was
Mhm.
faced with some incredibly difficult, perilous, horrible choices. She had lived a life of trauma. She came from a family that had experienced profound, profound trauma, both generational trauma and, trauma in her own lifetime. Um, and she, so that's before she even, took off in Hollywood. That's where she was starting from. Um, and then she was operating inside this system in Hollywood that really wanted her to be different. They didn't want her to be the person that she wanted to be. And so, figuring out the story, and I don't outline. I don't know what the story is before I start. I have an idea as I go along with the research, but I don't completely know. I have to kind of earn the story as I go. Um, and that tension between self-definition and expectation, that, those tensions between freedom and belonging, those things are questions that I've, you know, realized that I, those resonate with me hugely. Um, and also just, you know, she had a family that didn't look like um, other families. She married early, but then um, uh, she didn't marry again. She had this lifelong love with Spencer Tracy, but they never got married. In my story, she's bisexual. I think there's many people who would agree with me, many biographers who would agree with me. Again, you're going out on a limb, but there we are. Um, but to have a life and a family and create this whole world that doesn't look the way a traditional family does, was really interesting to me. My husband lives in the UK, and I have to live here because I take care of my mom. I have six stepchildren. Two are from my first marriage, um, and they stayed with me. I'm still their stepmom. I'm still like, and now my husband is their stepdad, and it's hysterical when you watch them trying to explain it to other people, and they're just like, you know, what's what's that now? But it works, so I have six stepchildren. I have, nothing looks the way it's supposed to. And that, writing about Katharine Hepburn, really uh, kind of helped me not feel self-conscious about any of that. It really helped me feel like, they come in all shapes and sizes. That's great. And, which is something that I knew theoretically, but when you have to write something, you have to really mentally live it in a different way. And so it helped it sort of sink in on a bone deep kind of level. And then the other thing that really stuck with me is she's like a guidebook for aging well. Like, that woman
Mhm.
was pushing snow off her roof in Manhattan in the 80s, in her 80s and the 80s. But it was like she was up there, like with a shovel, like shoving snow off her roof. I take care of my mom who's in her 80s, and it changed so much about the way I do it. I'm like, nope, you have to be responsible for that. Yep, you have to still clean the dog's teeth. Nope, you don't get off the hook because you're 89. Sorry, you've got to clean the dog's teeth. And that being responsible is part of the sort of the motor that keeps, her engaged. Not that she needs, help being engaged. She's the most engaged person ever, but it's good. It's healthy. It creates, that those reasons to to be responsible for, other people. So yeah, that's something that really stayed with me in a lovely way.
Well, thank you for sharing so much of yourself there and the response as well. And it's so often, I think, lives people that exist outside of the template, or the lives that say, "Hey, there isn't a template for what this looks like." Those are the lives that we're drawn to most, I think.
Yeah. And but it doesn't I mean those are the lives that we're absolutely drawn to read about, but living them is it takes a minute to be like, okay, I'm doing this,
Yeah,
And it's it's a great thing. So,
yeah.
yeah.
Well, I have one more question, unless there's anything else that we've missed that you want to make sure to include. And that question is, where can we learn more? Where can we follow your work and see more about this book?
I mean, I I think it's not so much, I mean, you can see her movies. You can see,
Mhm.
this is one of those things where it's so lucky. When you finish a book and you want more, there's so much more. Her films are there. You can actually see Philadelphia Story. You can see um you can see her interviews online. You can see, it's wonderful to be able to spend more time with a character after you've, read something. I love that. The first place I go is Google after I've read something that I really loved. I have to know, I have to know, I have to know. Um, so you can do all of that. And in terms of my work, I mean, yeah. So my last novel was called Vanessa and Her Sister, if you like Vanessa Bell and Virginia Woolf, um, and they were amazing to write about as well. And then I wrote a show that's touring in the UK if you happen to be there this year. So,
Wonderful, wonderful. Priya, I'm
yeah.
so glad we had the chance to connect, to talk film and history and research and all of the things. And certainly glad to have you back in this space anytime as you're working.
Oh, thank you so much. It's so lovely of you to have me. It's been really fun.